So I want to really talk about, to start off with, where some of the issues come from around data and why I think we as geospatial people have a bit of a head start on this front. And then talk a little bit about the human aspects of data, particularly data governance and data networks, and how we can improve those sorts of things. And then maybe talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that the Improvement Service have kicked off to try and help with some of these topics. So to start off, over the years we've been collecting data from local government, and we've obviously been getting it in from each of the 32 councils in different formats, different standards, etc., etc. So we wanted to unpick why that was over the years, and I just thought I'd put some of the policy and the legislation around some of the data sets that we've been traditionally collecting on the screen, and just pull out a few key words from these policy areas. If you delve into it, it's very clear that no one with any understanding of data has had any conversations with these policy officials. So you've got things like prepare a map and put data in the public domain, and put data in a convenient place. Now, my argument at the moment to Scottish Government is, and until we start addressing things like this and the fact that policy people don't really have any understanding of the importance of data in what they're doing, then we're always on the back foot. And the way that this sort of manifests itself is that obviously these policies are being created and supplied to policy delivery bodies like yourselves as local government. And then when we want to do any actual analytics of data around those policies or the services, then we really can't do it. We're in the stage of almost creating sticking plasters to try and understand what's going on. And I would argue that perhaps the gazetteers are the best example of a really good sticking plaster that we've ever created in Scotland. So we're constantly doing this, and until the policy changes, we're always going to be in this situation. What that means, if there's no sort of standardization to the way we're collecting data, is the majority of it is often unstructured. And this is a slide from a Gartner presentation. They did a survey a year or two ago that showed 80% of the data that most organizations collect is in this sort of unstructured form. And that really impacts us when we're talking about productivity and efficiencies and that sort of thing. I would argue again that the gazetteer is a really good example of structured data that we can do really clever things with. And I think we as geospatial people really understand why structured data is so much more easy to use because of the nature of the work we do. If you think about it from the value of data pyramids, all those data collection activities that we do that are the foundations of data at the bottom, unless we get those right, and unless the policy is suggesting we get them right, then everything we use the data for is going to struggle as a result. Even crucial decision making about how we improve the lives of our citizens and the world around us. So we need to start really addressing these things. And as geospatial people, I think we understand a lot of the issues that I'm displaying on here. Over the years, because of the way that GIS software has evolved, we've had to find solutions to all of the big problems: masses of data, performance of our computers. I've already mentioned unstructured data. We have a fundamental understanding of why data needs to be good, and that puts us a stage ahead from those other data people who are quite happy to get hold of whatever data they can and try and work with it. So thinking about what we've been doing at the IS over the years, obviously you in the room, you are well aware of the gazetteers, you're well aware of the standards that we brought in to try and improve those data sets. But we also had this thing that came along about 13 years ago called Inspire. And Inspire was all about better data, better accessibility to data. It touched on data discoverability, data download, data transformations, etc. So, I mean, using the OSG and the Inspire directive, that was the rationale for creating the Spatial Hub. And what we've done is created metadata records that make data far more discoverable. We get so many hits on our website from people just finding us via Google keyword searches now. We obviously make the data accessible in standardized downloads and APIs and offer it as a preview service. The FAIR principles, which have just come around just lately, actually. I think they came from the scientific community. But when you think about them, they're no different to what Inspire was talking about 13 years ago, and the sorts of things that we as a geospatial profession have been looking at. What happened with Inspire is there was a bunch of open source tools that were created to make data findable and accessible. We've got non-spatial tools like CCAN, which we use in the Spatial Hub, which can be used for far more purposes. And then I think, was it Oliver mentioned ArcGIS Online, and you've got FME technology. These technologies have enabled us to tell a story better and to transform data to make it far more understandable to people. As well as that, you've got organizations like the Office of National Statistics that created frameworks about interoperability and best practice around geospatial data years ago. But really, these concepts, they're no different outside of the geospatial domain. More recently, you've got the Geospatial Commission producing a whole bunch of best practice guidance. Again, they're adopting FAIR principles, and these can be used outside of the geospatial domain. So we should talk about these to anyone that has an interest in improving data. And then if you think about the reusability aspect of FAIR, we've got the Public Sector Geospatial Agreement, which makes really good, accurate data far more accessible. We've created partnership agreements with, for instance, utilities companies and health bodies, and we're trying to improve the way they make their data accessible. And then you've got the slightly thorny issue of open data. And we're really beginning to address that in the geospatial domain and trying to open up this data so more people can use it. One of the other things we've done just recently is create, with our change program, that's the change and transformation managers across local government, we've been producing a series of videos to explain to them why data is so important. And they're short snippets, they're about 12, 15 minutes long. And even though they're around data, there's a lot of really good geospatial examples in there. And these are the sorts of things we can push to our senior managers to explain why we need to be investing more resources in data. To just think about the human issues, the non-technological problems that we face, another Gartner survey here. And the top 4 things that came from this Gartner survey were not necessarily data or technical issues. They were all to do with human problems, human resourcing, and skill levels within organizations. So perhaps that's where we need to address our resources and our focus. One of the things we did last year was we did a big report for digital planning around the state of data in the planning sector. And one of the big focuses of that report was all about data governance and explaining to digital planning why we needed to think about the data governance structures behind the planning data that we all collate. And if you think about it, data governance is just responsibility, people taking responsibility for doing things and doing them well. At the most senior levels in Scottish Government, you've got Albert King, who's the Chief Data Officer now, and you've got people like Liz Pringle, that's the lead on digital planning. Now, they have a fundamental data governance role there and should be responsible for passing any directives down to local government. And if we think about our local government structures, where it's generally sort of a cell-based approach, where information is perhaps collected for one particular purpose and may move up and down the hierarchy chains, maybe there's a responsibility for us to start looking across our organizations and identifying those people that do have a fundamental responsibility for data, whether that's our senior managers, the people responsible for resourcing and hiring, whether it's those change and performance managers that I mentioned to Sean earlier, you know, and then the operational people like the gazetteer custodians. Many of them will be in the audience today, and maybe we need to think about bringing these people together and creating networks of communities that can discuss how we improve the data collectively, not just in GIS silos or data silos necessarily. And I know the gazetteer community here is a really good example of networking and people coming together to solve issues. But maybe we need to be doing more of this and branching out of those discrete groups. One of the things just to point you to, we have a case study page on our website. And one of the case studies that we really liked in the last year was this one about North Ayrshire Council. You know, this was just one GIS manager in a council that managed to create some really cool and really progressive applications, and he managed to get the ear of senior leaders, and then they started asking for him to do more, and then they started realizing, well, the data looks really crap and I know why that is, so I'm going to go back and change it. And before you knew it, you got this, you really got managers to sit up and take notice. And before you know it, this guy is leading the whole digital and data team at North Ayrshire Council, and that's in the space of 2 or 3 years. So it's a great example that I think the rest of the local authority can, local government can learn from. So just to think about what we're doing now in the IS, we were a spatial information service up until last year. There was a reorganisation in the improvement service, and now we're firmly embedded within a wider data and intelligence team, which incorporates research specialists and evaluation specialists. And everything we do now is brigaded under that data and intelligence title and is part of our strategic framework and our business plan. So we're really getting exposure outside of those traditional communities which we've generally spoken to in the past.